Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Wednesday, Yom Revi'i. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Sharon in Las Vegas, Paul in the great Northwest, Tom wishing everyone a freiliche Mittwoch, a joyous Wednesday. Mittwoch, what a great word. Midweek, Yiddish for Wednesday. Lucy in Minnesota, Bill in mid-Missouri, Shandora in the Bronx, the smoky Bronx. You're getting all that smoke from the Canadian fires, huh? Please, God, may that situation get under control with no further loss of life or injury. Please, God, spare everybody on that. John in Maine, Ryan in Jacksonville, Leona in Illinois, Melissa in Great Neck, Bell in Florida, Joe in the Inland Empire, Duncan, it skipped on me, Duncan in Mobile, Alabama, Jeff in Panama, Jonathan north of LA, David on the Jersey Shore, and Ella and Marjorie in Georgia, and Patrice in Utah. Welcome, everybody. Great to be learning with you. Some excitement in the Litvack household tonight. Our youngest is graduating from high school. Graduation is on Sunday, but tonight there's one of those beautiful, kind of celebratory dinners at the school, awards given out, etc. So we're going to keep it moving because as soon as the show's over, family is heading out. Can't be late. Okay. Our daf tonight is Chaf Beis, page 22, here in Tractate Gittin. This is the 19th volume of the Talmud. These are the laws of the get, the bill of divorce. We picked this up at the bottom of page 21b. We're continuing our discussion of Mishna number 4 here in chapter 2. And the Mishnah said that one may not write a get on anything that is attached to the ground. Basically, you can write the sort of standard part of the get, even on a leaf that's attached to the tree that's still attached to the ground. But you have to detach it from the tree before you add the essential parts of the get to it. Otherwise, it will not be a valid get and it will not produce a valid divorce. And Rabbi Yehuda deems a bill of divorce invalid unless both the writing and the signing, so all of the get was written once this, leaf, let's say, was detached from a tree, whereas the majority said you could write the standard part, but the signing, the key, crucial parts have to be done after it's detached. Okay, at the bottom of 21b. In connection with this discussion, the Gemara mentions several laws that are affected by items being attached to the ground or detached. So we're going to start to get into a little bit of a digression as we define what is attached to the ground, right? If a leaf is part of a tree that's growing out of the ground, so obviously that's attached to the ground. But what if a plant is growing in a clay pot? The kind of clay pot that has a hole in the bottom so that water can drain out of it. But the clay pot, instead of sitting on top of a clay dish, it's actually sitting on top of the ground. So the roots of the plant that's in the pot can grow through the hole in the bottom of the pot and enter the ground, right? And so is a plant growing in a pot that's a perforated pot that's sitting on the ground considered attached to the ground or not? That's the kind of question we're going to be encountering. If the husband wrote a bill of divorce on the clay of a perforated pot, which is considered to be attached to the ground, then it is valid, right? The plant might be attached to the ground. He's writing the get on the clay pot itself. Now, the whole structure is attached to the ground through the roots of the plant that are in the pot. But here, what are we learning? It's valid. If he wrote the bill of divorce on the clay of a perforated pot, which is considered to be attached to the ground, then it is valid. Why is it a valid get? Because he can take this pot and give it to her. It's not really attached to the ground. You can always pick it up and give her the pot. However, if he wrote the get on a leaf of a plant growing in a perforated pot, then what is the law? Abaye says it is valid, and Rava says it is invalid. And the Gemara clarifies their dispute in detail. Abaye says that it is valid, as he can take the pot with the leaf inside and give it to her. And Rava says that it is invalid, although it should be valid if he gave her the leaf together with the potted plant. The sages instituted a decree that it is invalid, lest one detach the leaf and give it to her. In that case, all agree that a bill of divorce that is fully written while attached is invalid. So interesting, the pot has roots of a plant inside it that grow and are attached to the ground, but he can always pick up the pot and give it to her. And you would think that, okay, if it's written on a leaf, even though it's attached to the ground, I mean, you could still pick up the pot and give it to her. If the pot is, you could write the get on the pot, why can't you write it on a leaf of a plant in a perforated pot? But the sages decreed this is considered like writing on a leaf of a tree that is completely attached to the ground. The Gemara has another discussion with regard to a perforated pot. In the case of a pot that belongs to one person and the plants in it belong to another person, if the owner of the pot sold it to the owner of the plants, then once the owner of the plants pulled the pot, he has acquired the pot, as it is a movable object which can be acquired via pulling. Right, so remember what we're talking about here is a kinyan. A kinyan is an act of acquisition. So under Jewish law, you need, in order for an object or a piece of land or a slave, because slavery existed in ancient times, when something that is owned by one person is going to be transferred to the ownership of another person, it's not enough that the buyer, let's say it's a buyer, or the recipient of, let's say it's a buyer, that if the buyer gives money to the seller, has the buyer acquired the object? No, he has not. He has to do some kind of formal act of acquisition. And where that matters is they might have agreed to make a purchase and sale. The buyer might have given the money to the seller, but if he has not yet taken possession of the object, then the seller, let's say, is responsible for a loss of that object before it is delivered to the buyer. In the case of a gift, if, for example, there's an animal and the animal is going to end up causing damage to some other person. So, it's going to be a question of who owns the animal. Now, you could say, well, I hereby give it to you. It's yours, right? So has the recipient of the gift received it yet? No, he has to do some kind of a kinyan, some kind of act of acquisition. In the case of a movable object, one of the methods of making a kinyan, of making that formal act of acquisition, is pulling it, right? It's I mean, how far does he have to pull it? It's just a formal action, right? It's not that he has to pull it all the way into his garage. If I say, okay, I'm going to sell you this clay pot, and so you give me $10, right? And the pot hasn't moved, so you haven't taken possession of it yet. But if you put your hand on it and just pull it like 1 inch or whatever the minimum distance is, now it became your pot. And if anyone was witnessing this, they would have seen that you did a kinyan by an act of pulling, right? So here they're saying where you have this unusual split ownership where one person owns the pot and another person owns the plant that's inside. And now the owner of the pot wants to give or sell the pot to the person who owns the plant that's inside the pot. You might think, well, he's got his plant in it. How much does he have to do? Answer, he's still got to do a kinyan. So he has to pull it as one example. There's other ways of making a kinyan, but this is one. So it's a movable object, so it can be acquired via pulling. However, if the owner of the plants sold the plants to the owner of the pot, the first case was the pot's owner sells the pot to the owner of the plant that's inside it. Now, the new case is the owner of the plants is selling the plant that's in somebody's pot to the owner of the pot, okay? So if the owner of the plants sold the plants to the owner of the pot, then the owner of the pot does not acquire the plants until he takes possession of the plants themselves. Can he pull the pot? No. That's not going to be enough to take possession of the plants because all he did is pull his own pot. The fact that there's plants inside the pot is not going to mean that he pulled the plant because it's his pot and now he needs to take formal possession of the plant that's inside it. How does he do that? By raking or weeding the dirt surrounding the plant that's in the pot. Since the plants are considered to be attached to the ground because they're in a perforated pot, different case than if it's not a perforated pot. Right? A perforated pot is like putting plants in the ground. How do you take possession of plants that are in the ground? You're not going to take them out of the spot where they are, but they can be sold from one person to another. How do you do it? The kinyan, the formal act of acquisition, is raking or weeding or doing some kind of an act that one could witness that and say, aha, he took possession of the plants. And it's going to be the same for a plant in a perforated pot when the owner of the plant is selling it to the owner of the pot. Since the plants are considered to be attached to the ground as they are in a perforated pot, they are considered to be part of the ground which cannot be acquired by pulling. If the pot and the plants belong to one person, a more typical situation, and he sold the whole unit to another person, the pot with the plant in it, then once the buyer took possession of the plants and acquired them, he acquired the pot as well. And this is an example of the principle that we learned in a Mishna in Tractate Kiddushin 26a. Property that does not serve as a guarantee, meaning not land, but rather movable property, can be acquired with property that does serve as a guarantee. In other words, you could buy a piece of land and take with it, maybe it's a field and there's a tractor on it, and the idea is I'm going to sell you the field and the tractor, okay? So when you take possession of the field, you can take possession of the tractor along with it because it's a package deal. And that's what so that's an example of that. Property that does not serve as a guarantee, i.e. movable property, can be acquired along with property that serves as a guarantee, meaning land, through the giving of money, or with a document, or by taking possession. Therefore, once one takes possession of the plants, which are considered to be like land, he also acquires the pot, which is a movable object. However, if the buyer took possession of just the pot, then he does not even acquire the pot, as movable property cannot be acquired through taking possession until he takes possession of the plants. To acquire the pot, one must either perform an act of acquisition specific to movable items, like pulling, or acquire the plants through taking possession of them by raking or weeding, which results in the acquisition of the pot along with it, as stated earlier. Now, the Gemara discusses another issue with regard to perforated pots. If a perforated pot was on the border of the land of Israel and its perforation was in the land of Israel, but its branches were outside the land of Israel, then what is the law with regard to the mitzvahs, the commandments that apply to produce grown in the land of Israel, such as teruma, right, setting aside a tithe that is consecrated for the use of priests only, and regular tithes that are set aside for the Levium or for the poor. And Abaye said, we follow its perforation, and it is considered to be growing in the land of Israel. So even though its branches are producing fruit over the border, outside the land of Israel, because the roots are in Israel, this plant is going to be subject to the tithing laws of plants which are grown inside the land of Israel. Rava said, we follow its branches. So the branches that are over the border, they're producing fruit which is not subject to the same laws of tithing as fruit that's grown inside the land of Israel. So the Gemara challenges, what is it that they disagree about? Who was it? Abaye and Rava. Abaye says we follow the preparation, and Rava says we follow the branches. And the Gemara notes, in a case where the plant in the pot took root in the ground, Everyone agrees that it has the status of a plant that grows in the place where the roots are. When they disagree, it is with regard to a case where it did not take root. Since its roots are contained within the pot, there is disagreement whether we follow the perforation or the branches in determining the status. Okay, they all agree that if the roots went through the bottom of the pot into the ground, okay, we follow the roots. They're in Israel, so we tithe the whole plant like it's grown in the land of Israel. But if it's in a perforated pot and the roots have not grown out of the perforation yet, so the roots have not entered the ground of Israel, this is where they have the dispute. Abaye says we follow the perforation. Even though roots haven't taken hold in the land of Israel, they have the potential to do so, and that's why he says we follow the perforation. Whereas Rava says, well, the roots haven't set ground. I mean, they have not hit the ground in Israel, so we're just going to follow the branches. The branches are outside of Israel, so we don't have to tithe that portion of the plant. Now the Gemara challenges. And do they not disagree with regard to a case where it did take root? Maybe this is not a case where it has not taken root. Do all agree that its status is determined by where the roots are? But didn't we learn in a Mishna, in Bava Metzia 118b, in a case of two gardens that belong to two different people, that are on adjacent terraces, one above the other, and leafy vegetables are growing between them on the wall of the step between the two gardens. So Rabbi Meir says these leafy vegetables belong to the owner of the upper garden. And Rabbi Yehuda says these leafy vegetables belong to the owner of the lower garden. In this case, the roots emerge from the upper garden, but the vines grow down and the vegetables grow into the airspace of the lower garden. So this seems to be analogous to the case where the roots are in the land of Israel and the branches are outside the land of Israel, or vice versa. And there is a dispute as to who is the owner of the vegetables, right? So you can imagine that you live on a kind of a steep slope, that you have an upper neighbor. He puts plants in the ground. His vines keep growing down the hill into your property, and they're producing fruit and vegetables on your property, even though the plant started on his property. So who owns the vegetables? And according to who owns it, presumably is the person who has the obligation to tithe it, right? Who owns it? The one where the roots are, or the one where the vegetables are actually growing? Now the Gemara makes a distinction between the case of the perforated pot growing on the border and these vines that grow from one person's property into another. There, in the case cited in the Mishna in Bava Metzia, with the upper neighbor and the lower neighbor, the reason for that law is, as is taught in the Mishnah, that Rabbi Meir said, what if the owner of the upper garden would wish to take his earth? This would result in a situation where there are no more vegetables for the lower neighbor, as the vegetables would not have earth from which to draw nutrients. The fact that the owner of the upper garden has the ability to destroy the vegetables is an indication that he is the owner. Maybe the vines grew onto the property of the lower neighbor, but they're getting their sustenance and their water and their dirt and nutrients from the upper neighbor. Rabbi Yehuda said, what if the owner of the lower garden would wish to fill the airspace above his garden with earth? This would result in a situation where there are no more vegetables, as they would be covered in the earth added by the owner of the lower garden. The fact that the owner of the lower garden also has the ability to destroy the vegetables is an indication that he is the owner. Their dispute is not with regard to how to define where the vegetables are growing. Rather, they disagree with regard to who has control over the continued existence of these plants. Therefore, this dispute is not related to the issue of the plant that is growing in a perforated pot on the border of the land of Israel. So the Gemara asks, but still, do they not disagree with regard to a case where the plant took root? But isn't it taught in a Baraisa, Tosefta, Masra 222? If there is a tree, and part of it is in the land of Israel, and part of it is outside the land of Israel, then untithed produce and non-sacred produce are mixed together in each one of these trees' fruits. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. And Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says the fruits in the part of the tree that is growing in the place that has an obligation to separate tithes, meaning in the land of Israel, they are obligated. And the fruits that are growing in a place that has an exemption from separating tithes, meaning the branches that hang over and grow fruit outside the land of Israel, they are exempt from tithing. So we don't follow the roots in case the tree is inside of Israel, or the vine, the roots of it are inside Israel. According to this view, it's where the fruit is. Fruit in the land of Israel, tithe it. Fruit growing over the border, don't tithe it. So what? Is it not discussing a case where some of its branches are in the land of Israel, some of its branches are outside the land of Israel, although its roots are in one of the two locations, and both Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi and Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel agree that the place of the roots does not define the status of the tree, but rather where the fruits are actually growing. The Gemara rejects this understanding of that dispute. No. It discusses a case where some of the roots are in the land of Israel and some of the roots are outside the land of Israel. So the Gemara asks, and what is the reasoning of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel? It is not possible to determine which fruits drew nutrients from which roots. So how can he rule that some of the fruits are obligated in tithes and some are not? And the Gemara answers, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel's statement is referring to a case where a rock divides the roots up to the trunk. And therefore, it is possible to distinguish which parts of the tree draw nutrients from the land of Israel and the parts that draw nutrients from outside the land of Israel. And this is a very specific case indeed. And the Gemara asks, if it is so that the roots are clearly distinguishable, so what is the reasoning of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi? Why does he view the fruits as being a mixture? And the Gemara answers, he holds that although there is a division between the roots, they cannot be distinguished from one another, as they then become mixed in the body of the tree. How can you say that a fruit that grows on the right side of the tree is only getting nutrients from the roots that are on the right side of the tree, and the fruits on the left side only get nutrients from the roots on the left side? The roots bring in the nutrients into the trunk, and then it all gets mixed up. And so the Gemara asks, with regard to what principle do they actually disagree? And the Gemara answers, one sage, meaning Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, he holds that the air above the ground mixes the nutrients. And the other sage, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, holds this part of the tree stands alone and that part of the tree stands alone. From the roots up to the branches, it is as if the tree were cut along the line of the border. But they haven't answered the question that we originally started with. What about a perforated pot that is completely inside the land of Israel, but its branches grow over the border? So it's getting all its nutrients from the roots. So according to the view that we follow the roots, okay, so we have to tithe the whole tree, even the stuff that's growing over the border. But according to the view that we just follow the fruit and where it is, we would only tithe the fruit that's growing in the land of Israel and not the fruit that's growing over the border. Now the Mishna taught, our Mishnah here in Gittin, taught that Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says that one may not write a get, a bill of divorce, on a material that enables forgery. Consequently, one may not write a bill of divorce on erased paper or unfinished leather. Now, we moved on from the perforated pot, and we moved on from writing a get on a leaf of a tree that's attached to the ground. We're talking about an additional provision in the same Mishnah, number 4, here in chapter 2, that says you can't write a get on paper that is easily erased. What is easily erased? Paper that's already erased, right? Erased paper. And unfinished leather, because it would be very easy to make changes in the writing. So Rabbi Chiya bar Ami said in the name of Ula, there are 3 hides, meaning 3 stages in the process of tanning leather hides. At each stage, the hide has a different name: matzah, chifa, and diphthera. Matzah, as per its plain meaning, with no additives. It is not salted, it is not treated with flour, it is not treated with gall nuts. This is when you just skin the animal, and this is an untreated skin. Now the Gemara clarifies, for what law is this type of leather mentioned? There is the law that mentions the minimum measure of this type of leather for which one is liable if he carries it out from one domain to another on Shabbos. And how much is the measure that determines liability for carrying out this hide on Shabbos? As Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yehuda teaches, it is equivalent to that which is used to wrap around a small weight. And how big is a small weight? And Abaye said a quarter of a litra in the system of weights that they use in Pumbedisa. Now, the second stage of tanning is called chifa. This is a hide that is salted and not treated with flour and not treated with gallnuts. For what law was this type of leather mentioned? There is the law that mentions the minimum measure of this type of leather, for which one is liable if he carries it out from one domain to another on Shabbos. And how much is the measure that determines liability for carrying out this hide on Shabbos? As we learned in the Mishna, Shabbos 78b, the measure that determines liability for carrying out this hide is equivalent to that which is used to make an amulet. Interesting that it's a different measure depending on what stage in the tanning process you are, what is going to be considered a significant amount, so that if you carried it from the private domain to the public domain, you would have been liable for violating Shabbos. Where if you have less than that, it's considered an insignificant amount of leather, and so you didn't do anything. Diphthera, the third stage of tanning a hide, this is leather, a hide from, let's say, a cow that was salted and treated with flour, F-L-O-U-R, and not treated with gallnuts. And for what law was this type of leather mentioned? For minimum liability for carrying on Shabbos. And how much is the measure that determines liability? This is the amount of leather which is equivalent to the amount on which a get is written, right? That's the minimum amount. And the Mishnah taught that the rabbis deemed valid bills of divorce that were written on erased paper or unfinished leather. The majority said, no, you can write a get on anything, even unfinished leather or erased paper. And the Gemara asks, well, who are these rabbis that disagree with Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira? So Rabbi Lazar said, it is the opinion, so the Amora, so there's a Rabbi Elazar who's an Amora, right? So a later sage of the period of the Gemara. And there was an earlier Rabbi Elazar who was a Tana, a rabbi of the Mishnah, right? So Rabbi Elazar the Amora says that it is the opinion of Rabbi Elazar the Tana, who says witnesses of the transmission of the get effect the divorce. Since the witnesses read the bill of divorce before it is transmitted in their presence, they may be relied upon to confirm the contents of the bill of divorce in court. Therefore, even if it was written on erased paper, there is no possibility that it would be forged, as the witnesses read what was written before it is given to the woman. They're not concerned that this is the kind of material on which the ink, could be smudged or rewritten or somehow forged, because really what matters in the process of a divorce is when witnesses see the get given to the wife. That's when the divorce really happens. And at that moment, it's not just handed to her, it's read aloud to her in the presence of these witnesses. So you can't forge it later, because these witnesses saw and heard what was written in it at the time that it was given to the wife. We're on 22b now. And the Amora, Rabbi Lazar, says that the Tana, Rabbi Lazar, deemed such a bill of divorce valid only when it was taken to court in order to confirm the contents immediately after it was transferred to the woman. However, if the witnesses testified 10 days after it was given, or just some other time later, then the Tana, Rabbi Lazar, did not deem such a get to be valid, and the divorce didn't happen. Why? We are concerned that perhaps the bill of divorce had a stipulation written on it, and she forged it by erasing the stipulation, as this bill of divorce was written on material that enables a person to easily alter what was written. So only if the witnesses testify immediately after the get is given can the court be sure that they did not forget what was written in it. And Rabbi Yochanan says, even if they testify from now until 10 days later, meaning 10 days after it was given, it is still a valid get. As if it is so that the get had a stipulation in it, well, then the witnesses will remember the stipulation, as they would not forget something so obvious. For instance, if the husband said, this is your get on condition that you don't drink any wine for 30 days, okay, so the witnesses would remember that. And she can't just erase that later and expect that nobody would notice. Therefore, if the woman erased the stipulation, the witnesses would not verify the bill of divorce when they come to the court to verify. And Rabbi Elazar, the later Rabbi Elazar the Amora, also says that the earlier Rabbi Elazar the Tana deemed valid a document that is written on these surfaces only with regard to gets, only with regard to a get, but not for other documents, as it is written with regard to the deed of purchase, from Jeremiah 32:14, quote, and put them in an earthen vessel so that they will remain many days. And this indicates that a deed of purchase and other similar legal documents must be made from a material that will last for a long time without being changed. A document that can be forged, that can be altered easily, may not be relied upon in the long term. So why would we accept that this can be done with a get, but we wouldn't accept it for other legal documents? A divorce is permanent. It has to be a long-lasting document. Answer, the sages were more lenient in the requirements of the get so that a woman would not end up stranded waiting for a get and unable to remarry. And Rabbi Yochanan says, Rabbi Elazar deemed these surfaces valid even in the case of other legal documents. And the Gemara asks, with regard to Rabbi Yochanan's opinion, but isn't it written in the verse from Jeremiah so that they will remain many days? And the Gemara answers, there the verse teaches us good advice, but it is not a halakhic requirement. It is advised that any legal document be written in such a manner that it can remain for an extended period of time, as it may be needed to prove ownership of the land. But we're not going to say that when the parties otherwise executed a valid, transfer of land through a purchase and a deed of purchase, that it wasn't a transfer of land because it was written on the wrong kind of material. It's just better practice to write it on something that's permanent. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 4. Here comes Mishnah number 5. Anyone is qualified to write a bill of divorce, even a deaf mute, an imbecile, or a minor. Additionally, a woman may write her own bill of divorce and give it to her husband so that he can present it to her. And a man may write his own receipt, which must be given to him by the woman to confirm that he has paid her the value of her marriage contract. And this is because the ratification of a bill of divorce is only through its signatories, and it is irrelevant who wrote it. Right? The actual writing, it has to be done for the sake of that particular woman, but it doesn't matter whether it was a scribe or the husband wrote it or the wife wrote it, right? If the wife wrote it or had it written, she has to gift it, like the actual document, gift it to the husband so that he can in return give it to her when the formal divorce takes place. But who actually writes it doesn't matter. In fact, not even the husband can write it, the wife can write it, a scribe can write it, a rabbi can write it, but even people who are ordinarily disqualified from serving as witnesses, a deaf mute, an imbecile, or a minor. Now, that's the Mishnah. Here's the Gemara. The Gemara asks, but how can a deaf mute, an imbecile, or a minor write a bill of divorce? They are not halachically competent, and they are not capable of writing a bill of divorce with the intent that it be for the particular woman. And Rav Huna says, and now we're in 23a, and that is the case only when there was an adult standing over him, when the adult supervises the writing and instructs the person how to write it, specifically to write it for the sake of this woman, which is an absolute requirement of a get. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, get them in. Rav Nachman said to him, if that is so, that anyone who is disqualified from writing a bill of divorce may do so with an adult supervising him, then if the one writing the get is a Gentile, and a Jew stands over him and instructs him how to write the get for the sake of this particular woman, would you also say that it is valid? And if you would say that, yes, it is valid to have a Gentile write the get, but isn't it taught in a Baraisa, a Gentile is disqualified from writing a get in any event? And Rav Huna answered, a Gentile acts based on his own will. Since he is halakhically competent, he will have his own intentions while writing, and he may not be relied upon to carry out the intentions of the supervisor. In the case of our Mishnah, when we're talking about a deaf mute, an imbecile, or a minor, they will only follow the instructions of the supervisor, and so it's really the one who's supervising who is the one writing the get. Rav Nachman then said, what I said when I raised a challenge from a case involving a Gentile is not correct, as from the fact that the Mishnah later disqualifies a Gentile with regard to acting as an agent in the bringing of the get, one can learn by inference that he is qualified with regard to writing, where he is not listed among those who are disqualified. So a Gentile could be the one who writes the get. He can't witness the get, he can't sign the get, but he could do the actual, the mechanical writing. And the Gemara asks, but isn't it taught in a Baraisa that a Gentile is disqualified from writing the get? And the Gemara answers, that Baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, who says witnesses of the transmission of the bill are the ones who effect the divorce. And when the verse states, and he writes her, that the husband writes a get for the sake of the wife, which is the source of the law that the writing needs to be done for her sake, it is referring to the writing of the bill of divorce and not to its signing. Therefore, we need the writing to be done for her sake, and certainly a Gentile acts based on his own will and may not be relied upon to write the bill of divorce according to the instructions of a supervisor. And that's where we're going to stop for today. We'll pick it up tomorrow, Thursday, at the regular Thursday time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Let's take a few comments and questions before we go to our kids' school for the end of school celebration. Tom, if you buy the pot and take possession of it, do you automatically thereby acquire the plants? Right, they said the opposite. If you buy the plants and they're in a pot, you automatically acquire the pot. So, I mean, presumably you can buy the whole unit. There's got to be a way to buy the whole unit. The question is, if you do the kinyan of pulling the pot, do you also have to and then add a little bit of water to the plants? I'm not sure. That was a bit of a digression for us on what a get can be written on. So I'm just not sure what the answer is, and I don't want to answer and be wrong. That's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night. Have a great night, everybody.